Have you seen the doc I linked in the Slack in the Scalability Lounge? I
No,
saw
I haven't.
like I couldn't add it to the meeting agenda thing.
Sure, we can take notes here, and then I'll take a copy of this across to the Scalability meetings.
That's the one that we.
Thing.
Yeah, that's cool.
It's also my fault for not linking that on the agenda as well. So I had a
No
couple of
problem.
questions there. I'm just going to move them across to this.
Sounds good. I'll get started with like a global thing of where we are. Since the last merge request that Guangmin did, we've generated all the dashboards and we have like the very limited content on there. Like all the dashboards are there, the limited content is on it, and now there's like two things that we need to, like two directions we can go to move forward. Like, do we make the content better by default, or do we start spreading the news to everybody and hear what they want to get on there? We already have a way to extend the dashboard, but we haven't done it, like actually done it yet, but it's possible.
So when we say like extending the dashboards or adding the data in there, which issues are those?
Extending the dashboards, like we don't have an issue for that yet. We just had an issue. That was the first one. Create a generic dashboard, kind of like I don't see it right now.
Create the generic metrics dashboard.
Yeah. So create generic metric dashboard for each stage group. That's the one that Guangmin just kind of finished. We just need to verify the last bit of it, but like the dashboard is there. It can be extended, but we don't know what to add for groups. So that's why there's no issue, because we don't have anything concrete to add there.
Okay. So this sort of comes to one of the points that I added right at the end. I've started working on like how we're going to communicate this out to the teams. And there's a lot of teams that we need to communicate with. And there's a lot of, I think there's going to be a lot of engagement that we'll need to do with the teams just because, well, yeah, there are a lot of dashboards. So I think that, I think that the two tasks need to run in parallel, because we're going to be communicating with teams, which can probably only really happen in the new year now, given how many people are out. And at the same time, I think we can continue with improving the dashboards to a certain extent, adding the data that's missing. And then we might be then looping back into creating the customizations for people as well straight away. But I think that trying to run it all in serial, I think it's going to take a much longer time to finish.
Yeah, there's some things that I don't know how much I can extend this epic, because there's stuff that I'm thinking about, like, for example, some groups don't really care about Rails request rates or sidekick jobs because they don't have any. So they need to have a way to remove that from the default dash. So that, like that, those kind of issues, I wanted to create them, but I don't really know where they belong. Well, I wanted to create them. I haven't gotten around to creating them yet. Can I just add them to this epic and you'll put them out when you think, like, not now?
Yeah, so I think for anything that you think of that needs to be done, just throw it into this epic, because I've also gotten to the point where I think that there are many projects inside of this piece of work. The first one being what we've accomplished now. We have created the dashboards for the stage groups, they exist. And I think the next piece, the next project is going to be communicating it out, and like the engagement with the teams. And I was almost thinking about having one epic per stage. So if you look at that issue number 666, having one epic for manage and one epic for plan, one epic for create, etc. And then inside of that, having one issue per group. And when we finish the engagement, then that wraps up, because I think there's the director level communication as well as the communication with the groups that needs to happen. I think
that's a good start. We should also maybe look into maybe removing some of these groups now because they don't have metrics in them.
Okay, so let's start taking notes where we are. Hold on. Sorry.
For example, yeah, as you probably know, the geo dashboard won't have metrics because we're not using that on GitLab.com.
And remove, sorry, did you say removed groups where there are no metrics?
Yeah.
So that sounds like each of those is a new issue.
Each one that we need to remove, you mean?
So between need a way to remove items that aren't important for the group, that's one issue. Removing groups where there are no metrics being collected, that's another issue.
Yeah, that's already
Okay.
two that I thought of.
Okay. Then also on the agenda, you said their content is limited, and then Huangmin, you've added 2 items there.
Yep. So because you already mentioned that we will need to add some more content to make the dashboard really useful. However, at the same time, we are not really sure what other state groups are need in the dashboards. So I think that we can come up with some more generic one like the latency or the filter that I already mentioned. And I think that in most systems, those are very common and can be used by on the state groups. And during that, we will continue to ask and talk to the state groups and communicate with them to verify what their specific requirements.
I think the reason we haven't added real latency in the beginning, because we have those metrics and they're available, but they're expensive metrics to record because of the cardinality of each bucket, and they're not accurate. Yeah. But we do have that information accurately in the logs, so that's why the links are there to point them at the logs. And I think Andrew, but I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think Andrew wants to point more towards the SLIs that include the latency metrics, and then like providing a way to go from SLIs to whatever in the logs that is more detailed, because we won't the latency metrics can be confusing because they can because of the buckets, and we want to decrease the number of buckets even more to have less cardinality there. So we only really have the buckets that we're using for alerting, like the graded and very bad.
So yeah. I think if that's the case, we need to document like how to use that piece of it. If we're saying that we have latency information, but we're not displaying it for some reason, then we need to say why. So I think then that becomes.
I don't know if we don't intend to have some latency information on there. We just need to explain why it looks the way it looks.
Yeah. So is there already an issue about the documentation?
Yes.
There's a documentation and tutorial there. So
there's inside the epic, there's already one issue for documentation, which I think create documentation and tutorial about stage group dashboards. Yeah, that's the one.
Yes. Okay. And about the documentation, I already put some items in there for us to discuss about. And because I used to be in this situation before that, I have to cross-cut the dashboards and the metrics to really broad audience. So there are something we need to talk specifically about, so that the accuracy of the metrics and what does a particular metric means, because it's really confusing when I first looked into metric, especially for somebody aggregation periods. It's really hard to tell whether the number in the metric is about. So if the dashboard say that it is one request for the project show action, what does it mean? It means that one request per minute, per second, or what? It's really hard to tell. And I can only tell that from the query I read from the dashboard, but it's really hard for other engineers to do so because they don't have more experience with the monitoring system. So maybe we should clarify as much as we can.
That's a very good idea, because it's
Yeah.
a thing that we've struggled with in the past, like communicating what the metrics we're showing actually mean. Yeah. So on some of the dashboards, like the CPU saturation ones that I was just visiting, we have like a panel that explains like how to kind of read this, how to proceed when it's saturated. Maybe we should come up with panels like that for the default metrics as well, or create an issue for that later.
Another question about the documentation is, where should the documentation live?
I commented that in the create documentation description. I think we should put it in doc/development, because that's generally like when I was on the product side of things, that's where I would look for anything.
Okay.
We have a tendency to put everything in the runbooks, while like on the product side, we tend to like document everything in the GitLab Rails repository, and like
I view the runbooks as for infrastructure.
the runbooks is for infrastructure, and the handbook is for management. Like the thing that I find easy about the Rails repository is that all the engineers have it on their laptop, so that means that whatever tool they use to search it, they can search it. And like that's what I find hard about consuming the handbook, is like it's hard to search it.
It is opposite in mind, because when I first look into GitLab, I have no idea we have a large documents folder inside the Rails app. Usually I will go to the handbook and type monitoring, and in the Rails repository, and want the handbook so that everyone can just go in and find by any item they can find.
That's a good point. What do you think about having the actual documentation in the Rails repository, but linking it from the handbook?
Well, it makes sense, or should be in the opposite, because in the future we may include some information in the dashboard outside of the Rails, and putting there we may miss some pieces of information. So I think the handbook is the a more generic place to put the documents.
I would argue against that, because we keep a list of most of our metrics, because it's not always up to date inside the documentation. Like all the metrics that GitLab Rails emits should be in the documentation in GitLab Rails, but also we've moved Workhorse into that repository. So the only other component, like the only other GitLab component, two GitLab components that are not in there are GitLab Shell, Gitly. But we do have like development documentation for Gitly and GitLab Shell in that repository. I'm going to add links to the documentation that already exists to that issue that we're now discussing, and I think we can continue there to see where it ends up. But
that's a good idea.
Both places should have a mention, at least a mention. Both the handbook and the development docs should have at least something. And then where the meat of the documentation lives, we will still need to discuss there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Bob, you've also talked about adding SLIs to stage group dashboards.
At some point when I was building the mapping, Andrew started this, and that's why like we worked in parallel and we kind of pushed things forward fast. So Andrew would be unblocked on this. I think he was talking about adding new recording rules and stuff to be able to show something useful there, but I don't know where, because Andrew was in a bit of a finish everything before my leave kind of rush, so I didn't ask more.
So having had a look through the project, and especially seeing how big the communication issue is, I think that this should be its own epic, and it should be removed and thought of separately, because I'm already starting to see it getting bigger. And I think that if we control what is happening in each project a little bit differently, I think we've got a better likelihood of like shipping impactful projects than just having it like the sprawl happening. So I think a task for me is I'm going to make this new epic and split this out from the project.
Okay, we should have a chat with Andrew about that when he gets back, because I think he had a vision on it, but I don't have it yet.
Well, I think when all of the projects are split out, it will become easier to see it as well, because like if I lay out how I think the project goes, I think we've created the generic dashboards. We now start the conversations with the stage groups, and at the same time produce any customizations or removals or documentation. Like all of that stuff happens in parallel. But another thing that's happening parallel is also the SLIs for stage group dashboards. So it's almost like there's two completely separate streams of work that happen.
Regarding the customization, before we even start reaching out to the global all stage group, should we, because last week I was in incidents with Grzesiek a few times, and I saw that they've kind of cobbled together a bunch of metrics regarding their features that I think are useful, but they could be improved. They have their own alerts, that kind of stuff. So maybe we could just sit down with checkers at some point in the new year and just see what they'd like to add, and that way we have an example and we know what to document, and then we can throw that documentation out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think like use them as the first. He's Verify, isn't he?
Verify, but he's staff, so I think continuous integration, everything on the
So I think then what we do is we use Verify as the first group. So I'll create the epic for Verify. I'll create the issue for that. I'll create issues for the teams inside of there, but I think we have the conversation with Grzegorz and see what it is they need. But I think before we have that first conversation, even though it's going to be with him, we need to have the video tutorial that at least introduces this as like at like a director level, or like a really high level introduction to this is the dashboards and this is what they are. And we need some sort of high level documentation as well. It doesn't have to be like all the way down to like the absolute fine-grained details of everything, but we have to have something that goes with the first communication, and we can improve that as we communicate with more groups.
Should we have that as part of just our documentation? I don't know, in the scalability handbook, just the way this works now, how we generate the dashboard, how we map that to feature categories, how that all works?
Well, I think we definitely need that, but I don't think that when we communicate that out to the stage groups that's what they're interested in.
No, true.
They're interested in like the very first look that they get. What do these boxes mean? How do I connect what I see on the screen to what I'm coding every day and what's running on infrastructure? I don't think that they're necessarily interested in, okay, so it emits a metric over here, and then it gets sucked into this piece here, and then it lands up over there. They're just like, what am I seeing? There's a lot going on in some of those graphs. And how do they know what's bad?
But I mean more like, because right now there's no easy way to get to those dashboards. Like, how do you find them?
Well, I have no idea.
Like, I know how to find them. I'm asking you, like, as you don't know, because me and Kwang Min, we know where they are. We'll find them.
Well, I have the link from you now, so I know where they live.
Yeah, and Slack, yeah, that's.
Well, I think that's part of the epic for each group, right? So in the epic, it is, scalability is reaching out to Verify so that we can give you information about this. This is where you find it. This is the documentation. This is the tutorial. This is the conversation we're going to have with you about your about your dashboard. And we just start from there and see where it goes.
We start from there, and then and for that we need like a high level document somewhere.
Yeah.
And let's have that be 6.6.
Well, I can create a new issue. Well,
6.6.5. 6.6.5 can be like, we have stage group dashboards. here, and then the link that I pasted in Slack yesterday. Here they are. Find us in this epic for customizing yours, kind of thing. So just we have that written down somewhere with some links.
So I'm going to change 665 to be the top level, like the high view information about this. That will be the first communication. That will be like the first pack that we give out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the longer, more detailed documentation, which includes that comment that Huang Min has put there, I'm going to move that to be a separate documentation part where there's much more detail provided about the dashboards and how they work.
Yeah, I think for that, it might also be interesting to include, for example, Ben from the observability team, who have like a deep knowledge on how these Prometheus, like what these things that Prometheus spits out for us mean, and like what the queries mean and how, yeah. I don't think we need to repeat the PromQL documentation, but it might help to add some examples and then.
Well, again, I think we need to go about this iteratively as well. I don't want to produce an encyclopedia of stuff that no one's going to read. So I think, why I find, why I find your comment so interesting is because the whole team has looked at this stuff for a year, and we've forgotten what it looks like when it looks new. And that's why I think it's so important to have that view on it, because other people are going to look at it with the same way that you look at it and go, what on earth does this mean? I do not know. And that's, so we have to capture that somewhere. But beyond that, I think, beyond that point, we wait for the information that comes in from other people and the questions that come in, and how we then build it out further than that. Because I know if we start writing this stuff down, it's going to take us a long time. Meanwhile, people could get more comfortable with it and not need everything, but we need to at least show them what information do you need to not panic when you see the lines looking like this, and when should you panic because the lines look like that. So, yeah. Okay. We've got 5 minutes left, so I think we've sort of covered everything in here. I think the most important thing, Bob, will you have time to record that high level run through for Maren this week?
So today or tomorrow? Yeah, that should work, I think.
Great. Okay. Any other thoughts or anything else we should talk about with the last 5 minutes?
Well done on your first merge request going in, Huang Min.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I do have one question. Sorry. Yeah. Regarding about the communication plan. So I can see that in the communication plan, there are lists of like the metrics and the groups we need to reach out, but how exactly we have to reach out to them?
Well, like, I drew up this massive table last night, and then I thought to myself, oh dear, this is very big. So then I went to bed to deal with it tomorrow. But I think I think that the first thing is to split each of the groups. So each, so for example, Verify, we're going to create their own epic for them. And I think we will reach out to them independently first. So before we tell all the other stages that this stuff exists, we'll go straight to Verify and we'll tell them, these are your dashboards, these are the tutorials, let's have a conversation. Because Gregor is super interested and has already engaged with us in this. And at the same time, Maren has a conversation with some of the directors coming up, and he's going to be using that tutorial that Bob creates to tell the directors that this is coming. And by that stage, we should hopefully have had that communication with Verify, and we all know what kind of changes are needed and should be made. And from there, we can finish building the communication plan out, because I don't know what kind of questions they ask or where that conversation is going to lead. And I'm loath to create what's almost like 11 epics here, and then to have to change all of them again at a later stage. So I think we'll just create the one, see what happens, and then we'll create the rest from there.
So in the short term, we don't need to reach out to any of the groups, besides the, I think we're going to reach out to continuous integration, because verify stage continuous integration. We start there, or?
Yeah, so I think let's, I'll create the epic for verify, the issue for continuous integration, and we start there. Yeah, we'll start there and then take it one meeting at a time. But another question that's come to mind while asking that, Huang-Min, do you have enough on this project to do in Bob's absence?
I'll create more stuff that I'm going to ask Huang-Min to flesh out now that he's seen the way the dashboards are built, and I think he already had some nice ideas on what can be improved there.
And Bob already mentioned about the customization. So right now the script is not very customizable. So I can work on that during the break of everyone. And I think I can start there.
Great, okay.
I'm going to create those issues like straight after this.
Yeah, okay.
Great, I'll also spend some time on the epics and structuring the epics today. So if you see things moving around, it's just because I'm trying to put these into sizable projects. That's hopefully today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else?
No, not in this topic.
Perfect. Okay. Well, thanks very much for being on the call. Yeah, I'm very excited about this project because it feels like it's finally connecting the teams together the way that I've been hoping to do for the whole year, and it's all coming together. And I think it's also happening at a great time because we can get into the new year and start publishing all of these things out straight away. So this is wonderful, and thank you both so much for getting to this point.
Are you going to copy the document that we just made into the team meetings document? Thank you.
Yes, I will. Yeah. Great. Enjoy the rest of your day, and chat soon.
Talk to you later.
Yeah.
Bye.
See ya.